Welcome, everyone. Looks like we've got a nice group of folks that have joined us, so I think we can go ahead and get started today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Angela Farwig. I'm a consultant with School Readiness Consulting. I'm joined today by my colleagues Mimi Howard and Samantha Gray-Keene. And on behalf of all of us, I do want to thank the Office of Great Start for their support in this work. Before we get started, we're just going to go through a few housekeeping items. So first, the webinar is being recorded. Everyone is automatically on mute and your videos are turned off. We've also enabled closed captioning. If you'd like to use that, you can turn it on by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and selecting show subtitles. Feel free to use the chat during the presentation to note any questions or comments, and we will try to address those during the breaks and at the end. You can also use the raise your hand feature to ask a question during the breaks. Samantha will be monitoring the chat. So if you have a question about technology or anything else, you can just drop that into the chat and she is going to do a great job of helping you out. So now we're going to dive in. Mimi and Samantha and I are going to turn off our videos because the webinar is being recorded and will be posted. And then we will dive into our content. Okay, great. So we're just going to go ahead and start with a quick overview of the webinar series. This webinar is the third in the series. The goal of the webinar series is to introduce communities across the state to the Michigan approach to coordinated eligibility and enrollment and various opportunities for communities. The first webinar covered what is coordinated eligibility and enrollment. It had a description and introduction to the coordinated and eligibility and enrollment framework that the state is using. The second webinar covered elements of coordinated eligibility and enrollment and included possible strategies and examples for implementation. And today's webinar is the third in the series, and it will provide an overview of the forthcoming coordinated eligibility and enrollment toolkit and steps that communities can take to develop a locally based coordinated eligibility and enrollment plan. The fourth webinar, which is next week, will provide information about the upcoming community of practice. The webinars are being recorded and they are being posted on the Michigan Department of Education's YouTube channel. That first webinar has been posted on the channel, and I think we can put a link to that in the channel. I don't think the second webinar is up quite yet, but I'm sure will be posted shortly. We will also be sending out the slides for this webinar. The webinar series is open to anyone who's interested in attending. It's really geared towards any interested Michigan community member who would like to learn more about coordinated eligibility and enrollment. You can attend any combination of sessions. It's not required to attend any of the webinars to apply for the upcoming community of practice, but the webinars may help with the application process. So just want to take a quick moment to orient everyone to what we will be covering today during today's webinar. First, we're going to spend a little bit of time setting the context and reviewing the Michigan Coordinated Eligibility and Enrollment Framework. We have definitely gone over this information during the last two webinars as well. So we're going to keep it pretty high level today, but we will be doing a brief section on that to get us started. The bulk of our time will be spent previewing some of the information that will be included in the upcoming Coordinated Eligibility and Enrollment Toolkit. The focus of the toolkit is on helping communities develop plans to launch or enhance family-centered coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. We will definitely stop at a few points during the presentation on the toolkit to request your feedback on things that should maybe be included in the toolkit. So we're really excited to hear from you about that. Finally, we will wrap up with an overview of what's coming next, including more information about applying to the community of practice and answer any final questions. So now just sort of diving into the first part of our agenda and setting that context. As I mentioned, we're going to quickly run through some background information on coordinated eligibility and enrollment generally and in Michigan, just for those who are joining us today for the first time. This information, as was mentioned, was provided during the first two webinars, so definitely check those out if you want to go into more detail on any of this. So quickly just running through the opportunity in Michigan. As many of you know, coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts have been underway in states and community across the country, including Michigan, for a number of years. They've become more of a national priority more recently through the federal preschool development grant Birth to 5 initiative. Michigan was successful in applying for the first round of those PDG funds, and that has supported really important work in the state, such as the needs assessment, strategic planning process, and the Listen and Learn Symposium. It also led to the state's successful application for a PDG B5 renewal grant. And that included a bonus opportunity for states to pilot or expand efforts for coordinated eligibility and enrollment. So to follow through on this opportunity, Michigan's Office of Great Start is partnering with us at School Readiness Consulting to implement this project, which is really focused on supporting local communities to build and enhance systems to coordinate eligibility and enrollment. And we will sometimes abbreviate coordinated eligibility and enrollment as CEE, just to make it a little simpler. This project is supported by the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 resources that were awarded to Michigan in 2019 and then renewed for 2020 through 2022. The project consists of a series of overlapping activities to support CEE efforts across the state. So the first part of the project was the development of a coordinated eligibility and enrollment landscape, and that is posted on OGS's PDG website. It provides a snapshot of efforts in Michigan and around the country. And I think we can put a link to that website in the chat where you can grab that full landscape report. There is also an executive summary available of the landscape. That's a shorter and sweeter document that really provides an overview of the information. That hasn't been posted yet on the website, but I think we also have a link to that we put into the chat, that actual document. So you can definitely check that out if you're interested. The second part of the project is this 4-part webinar series. The third part is the upcoming CEE Toolkit, which is going to help communities across the state develop a plan to build or enhance their CEE systems. And the fourth part of the project is a community of practice in which School Readiness Consulting will provide consultation and learning opportunities to Michigan communities engaging in CEE efforts. And we're going to provide some more details and information on the COP towards the end of the webinar. So quickly, just wanting to review what are we talking about when we talk about coordinated eligibility and enrollment. Generally, coordinated eligibility and enrollment is a systems building approach that aims to address the current fragmented nature of the early childhood system and ensure that all young children and their families can benefit from the full range of services and supports that are available. There are lots of approaches and strategies that are being used to develop CEE systems. So on this slide, we did just want to highlight 2 common approaches and some of the terminology that folks use to talk about these approaches. So on the left, you'll see one-stop shop. This involves providing a central or single point of entry through which families can access a variety of programs. There are other terms that can be used to describe this kind of approach or similar approaches. So you may have heard single point of entry, centralized access, or referral hub. On the right side of your screen is No Wrong Door. This involves developing processes and systems to link families to the right resources to meet their needs, regardless of which program or service provider they work with first. We've also included 2 visuals to represent these 2 different approaches and how they function. So for the one-stop shop visual, you'll see a family that uses a central location or resource to learn about the various options that might be available and be connected to them. In the No Wrong Door visual, you'll see families that are being connected directly to other available resources through a variety of entry points. It's important to note that states and communities are often using one or even both of these approaches when designing CEE systems, specifically when they focus on how families are initially accessing services. So just want to quickly highlight the goals of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. There's definitely several important goals that these systems can advance. First, better meet the needs of children and families. CEE systems center the experiences of families in learning about, choosing, and accessing early learning programs and services. Help ensure equitable access to programs and services. CEE systems should prioritize serving families that have historically had the least access to services and include a strong focus on cultural and linguistic responsiveness in supporting families with identifying and enrolling in programs. Allocate limited resources more efficiently. CEE systems focus on reducing duplication and enrollment, getting families off of wait lists, and streamlining administrative processes for families and providers to ensure that the maximum number of families can benefit from limited resources. And finally, promote effective service delivery. Strong CEE efforts can help break down silos between providers and generate more effective approaches to service delivery that can create improved outcomes. So quickly turning to what does CEE look like for Michigan? Michigan's vision for advancing coordinated eligibility and enrollment is that families can access all programs and supports that are available to them at any point where they come into contact with the early childhood system. So this vision therefore includes incorporating and thinking about no wrong door approaches as part of coordinated eligibility and enrollment, really building on the state's mixed delivery early childhood system, and then incorporating the broader network of programs and supports that aim to meet families' comprehensive needs in the early years. This is not meant to be or is not a one-size-fits-all approach. The focus is really on building on what's already in place in the state and in communities, and the important work that's already been underway in communities to make connections and leverage various parts of the network of supports to develop CEE systems that really work in the local context. So we're going to quickly just review the CEE framework that is included in the landscape. This was developed to support the state and communities to think about and implement comprehensive coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. So the toolkit will use the framework to help communities think through and organize their CEE efforts. The framework has a few components. First, the principles of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. Those are found in the outer dotted circle. Those are family-centered, relationship-based, equitable, and coordinated and aligned. Then there's areas where state policy can best support local coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts. Those are found in the middle light blue circle. Those include shared vision, resources, data, and local capacity. And then you'll see key elements that constitute successful on-the-ground CEE systems. And those are in what I've called the flower graphic, or sort of those overlapping ovals in the middle. Those elements are awareness of resources, selection of resources, receipt of resources, and connections between resources. And you will see that all of the components are placed around families, who are the center and focus of all coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts. So definitely want to plug one more time that you can find a lot more information about the framework from the previous 2 webinars, as well as in the landscape and executive summary. So definitely want to encourage everyone to take a look at those documents. So I'm going to pause here just for a minute before we shift to the next part of our agenda on the toolkit, just to see if there's any questions on any of that sort of introductory and context setting information. I'll just pause for 1 minute to see if people have a chance to ask any questions. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into providing an overview of the toolkit. Michigan is really focused on building community capacity to implement approaches to coordinated eligibility and enrollment. And the state is supporting communities to do this by providing resources such as the landscape, the toolkit, and the upcoming COP. By providing a framework for designing these systems, along with examples of best practices and strategies that have worked, the landscape and the toolkit are aimed at helping communities create more family-centered and aligned CEE systems that really build from the strengths that exist in families and in local communities and connect families to supports in a more aligned and coordinated way. The framework and the toolkit are designed to support and guide local communities in their locally designed efforts, rather than prescribe one set method or model that should be implemented. So the toolkit does this by helping communities develop a plan for implementing community-based approaches to CEE. It walks communities through the steps that are needed to develop a plan to build or expand CEE systems at the community level. If we do recognize that communities may be at different stages in building their coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems, so it's definitely meant to just help folks wherever they are in that process. You can start at the beginning, you can jump into the toolkit at various places along the way, go back and just use that to sort of assess where you are. The focus is on centering families in the process and really thinking comprehensively across programs and systems to develop a localized CEE approach. The toolkit is still in development. It's coming out in January. And so we are gathering information from communities around tools and things that they're using. And we'll also take a few breaks today to give you all the opportunity to share some things that have worked in your communities with us via the chat. So today we're going to just run through some of the steps that are incorporated in the toolkit right now and highlight some of the tips and tools that will be included in the toolkit to give you all a sense of what's coming. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mimi to get us started by walking us through the first phase of developing a community-based CEE plan.
Thanks, Angela, and hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Yes, getting started, creating a planning and leadership structure is the very first step for communities who perhaps have not been engaged in this work before. This is where you start. And the decision to take on this work can really come from any member of people or sectors in your community, from concerned individuals to a community agency, a public sector, or even funders. But once the decision has been made, the first important step is to gather a team. So we're going to talk about three things here in this section, in the getting started section. The first is consider possible team members. Creating the best team possible is important because this is the group that will drive the work and develop the plan. Careful considerations of who will be included will be the key to ensuring you get the work done. What to do? The first important thing that you want to do in getting started, therefore, is to assemble the right community planning team. Following are 3 steps that you can follow to gather your team. First, start with families. They must be at the table as valuable co-designers of any plan that reflects their needs, preferences, and experiences. Next, cast a wide net to consider all the possible groups and stakeholders that should be included. These could include providers and others associated with your mixed delivery system, providers within the larger ecosystem of comprehensive family supports and services, and other key stakeholders in your community, such as funders, ISDs or LEAs, representatives of parent collaboratives, or community resource centers. Finally, now that you have completed an exhaustive list, the next step, unfortunately, is to narrow that list back down again. So the step here is to strategically think about who understands your community context, who has the experience, knowledge, and the capacity to contribute to developing and implementing a plan. Some of the tips and tools included in the toolkit to help you in the selection process include a roster of all possible members to include, divided into stakeholder groups, including types of families, mixed delivery and comprehensive service providers, and trusted community leaders and champions. Outreach tools are designed to help you connect with potential team members, and team building templates are included that will help you to document and track outreach and final selection of your team. Step 2, ensure that you have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive team. As you begin assembling the team, it's important to assess the diversity of representation. Examining who is at the table can help you identify what strengths and gaps you may have in terms of experience and context expertise about the intended beneficiaries, issues, and connections to the communities you intend to serve. Here, as with the initial step of assembling your team, you must start with families and include families who represent the diverse cultural, linguistic, racial, and economic characteristics of your community. Families can bring lived experiences.
Hold on just a minute.
Apologies.
Yep.
Mimi, keep going. I'll pull it back up. Keep going.
Okay.
Families can bring their lived experiences into the planning process, and there might be others whose voices need to be elevated in the work, such as early education providers, family support workers, or home visitors. Finally, engaging trusted and community messengers who can connect with and gather information from families and other stakeholder groups will ensure, as you move into collecting and data collection and understanding community context, that you have the best connections possible. Some of the tips and tools included to help you convene a diverse team include a list of definitions of terminology used to discuss equity issues that will provide a common understanding among team members. Also included is a list of strategies for identifying and assembling a diverse team and characteristics to look for to ensure you have the right balance of experience, knowledge, community reach, and capacity to inform planning and decision-making. And as equity mapping tool is also included that has been designed to help you to analyze the diversity, equity, and inclusion of the community team to ensure that the team has a strong connection to the community, its issues, and intended beneficiaries of the community-based CEE system. Next step is to establish team structures and protocols. Good teams, as I'm sure you all know, also need good operating structures and processes that provide clear and commonly understood ways for getting the work done. When you take the time to put leadership, planning, and communication structures into place, you can help ensure that your team is cohesive and able to stay focused on the work. Start by deciding on a leadership structure. In communities typically involved in CEE type coalition building or as community-wide initiatives, typically consider one of two options. One is identifying an anchor or backbone organization with the resources and infrastructure to integrate the work into ongoing operations and provide leadership throughout the planning process. A second option is to create a core leadership team drawn from the larger team whose members commit to facilitating and keeping the work going. Next, it will be important to establish a set of ground rules or community norms that can help the team keep moving ahead in the same direction and provide some guiding principles for working together, even when tackling complex or sensitive issues. Once the leadership structure is in place and you have established a set of norms for working together, the team will be ready to jump into the process of working together to move the planning forward. This is really where the rubber hits the road and will require some skill and understanding of the sometimes messy process of leading and participating in collaborative group work and making decisions together. Tips and tools included in this section to inform creating the right operating structures include examples of ground rules and community agreements, descriptions and a set of steps for engaging in a participatory decision-making process, and finally, some tools and templates for planning and facilitating meetings. So we're going to pause here just for a second to ask if you have any strategies or tips or tools for creating a planning and leadership structure that you would like to see in the toolkit. Please feel free to put your suggestions in the chat or raise your hand and we can monitor them that way.
I do see, Mimi, I do see a question in the chat about using the grant towards Help Me Grow. I will respond and I'll see if Mimi or Samantha want to jump in as well. You know, the approach of Michigan is really supporting communities in their CEE efforts. And the community of practice application is out. And if folks have taken a look at that, you'll see. So there, I don't know that there's any sort of requirements in terms of specific models or things that can be used. It's really focused on supporting whatever approaches communities want to take that will work in their local context.
And I see a second question, another, and please, Angela, hop in and help me with this. Is there one organization that is providing most or all of the funding to supporting the work? How does this toolkit work in that reality? This toolkit, I think, has really been designed for any community to pick up and use wherever they are in the process. And part of that is you know, identifying some funding to keep the work going. So there will be 8 communities, as you know, funded for a community of practice. But beyond that, this is really intended to just help communities build their own capacity and structures for getting the work done. Another question. Is there a recorded overview 10 minutes for leadership team and any others to bring them up to speed as this work or opportunity? We can, you know, all the webinars are available. I don't know whether you could maybe take the first 10 minutes that Angela provided here or any other webinars 1, 2, and 3 did provide a quick overview that's probably not more than 10 minutes that you could certainly use. And, oh, thank you, Samantha. We can share the PDF of the slides that folks can use.
Mimi, I'll also note that there is an announcement that was developed that sort of provided a quick and easy way to sort of read about some of the information regarding all of the opportunities.
Right.
So I know OGS sent that out to some folks.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I see a suggestion around having talking points when inviting the leadership structure. I am assuming that is a suggestion for the toolkit, and that is great. We'll definitely take a note of that. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the next part of the webinar, and definitely, keep those questions coming, and we'll try to address them. But just want to make sure we have a chance to go over everything today. I'm going to move us on to the next part of the presentation on moving ahead. So once you've assembled a diverse group of committed people with the knowledge and the skills you need to get moving, it's really time to get started and dive into the work, as Mimi noted. So this phase is all about getting to know the local context about CEE in the community and hearing from families and community members about what they've experienced. So here we have it broken down into 3 steps. The first step is gathering data and feedback. Second is assessing what's currently happening with CEE in the community. And then the third is really taking that time to analyze all of this information you've collected, all of the feedback, and really be thoughtful about what it's telling you as you get moving with the planning process. So turning to the first step around gathering community data and feedback. Taking this step is really important in building and expanding community-based CEE systems, because this is what can help you identify what services, resources, and supports families want, what they need, and whether they are in fact receiving them. Data can identify gaps in resources and shine a light on disparities, while community input is really important to gain a comprehensive understanding of community context and the lived experiences of those most impacted by this work. So a good place to start looking is to start looking at quantitative data to get a baseline understanding of the demographics of your community, what programs are available, what enrollment looks like, things like that. And often this data can be gathered to some extent from online resources. Some of you may have the benefit of having, community reports or things that have been, written for your particular community that will have some of this data. We have captured a few of the online resources that, we have found helpful and might be helpful to you in doing this work. Those are all in the chat, those links, and will be in the toolkit. Things like census data that you can get from the American Community Survey can help you with some demographics. The Kids Count Data Center is a really great resource if you haven't checked that out. Obviously, the My School Data website is the publicly facing sort of data portal for education data in the state. And then the Great Start to Quality website can help do a search and sort of put yourself in the place of someone looking for programs in your community to see what might be out there. So in addition to sort of the numbers and the quantitative data, gathering qualitative data and community input is really important to get that robust understanding of what's happening sort of behind the numbers, what's the story behind the numbers, and ensure that multiple perspectives are included. So some common methods of collecting qualitative data and feedback could be something like a survey, interviews, focus groups, and just community conversations with folks, or methods that capture lived experience, such as observation or allowing people to document their own experiences with photos or videos. So sort of following someone as they try to enroll in a program, for example, and letting them document that. Things like that can really give a good window into what people are experiencing. So gathering this data and the feedback using a variety of tools and methods is a really great way to get that understanding of how current CE efforts are actually working in the community and playing out. They may also sort of point you in areas in the system that you're going to want to explore further in the next steps. So in this part of the toolkit, there will be tips and tools, including list of resources to gather demographic and other publicly available data, guidelines for using the different tools for collecting qualitative data that were mentioned. So guidelines around, thinking about when to use a focus group or when to do a listening session. Including some key questions that you could use to explore the different elements of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. So looking at sort of those components around family awareness. How are families selecting resources? How are they receiving resources? And how are they being supported through connections and transitions? and also some tips for reducing barriers to participation so that you can create opportunities to hear from diverse stakeholders and those who traditionally are not always engaged in efforts like this. So the next step here is assessing current CEE efforts in the community. So along with that sort of data and community feedback, just understanding what coordinated eligibility and enrollment strategies are currently in place in the community and how they're being implemented can really help you create a strong foundation to build your community-based plan. So this stage is really all about doing a local landscape scan to understand what's currently in place in your community with respect to coordinated eligibility and enrollment, and begin to pinpoint strengths that could be built on or gaps that could be addressed in the plan. So to support this part of the work, the toolkit will include a community coordinated eligibility and enrollment self-assessment tool based on the elements of the Michigan framework. So this could include examples of coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts that could be underway to sort of help you get a sense of, oh, like this fits in here. And so you can look at this tool for that. So for example, are there online resources or community-driven strategies underway in the community that are helping build family awareness? Does the community currently engage in family-centered application processes, or is there a system in place to track enrollment? Things like that would be included in this self-assessment. It would also include some resources for actually how to use those assessment findings to identify early planning targets, sort of move you into the next phase of the work. And then finally here we have analyzed your findings. And this is the place where you take a moment to look at all the data, community feedback, and your understanding of what's happening with CEE from the self-assessment, and just take a moment to analyze all that information. It's really important to stop here and to take a beat, before plunging ahead into the next steps, because it's a lot to process. And taking the time and using these tools to engage the team and compiling and analyzing the findings will definitely help ensure a more successful and streamlined planning process. There are definitely a lot of ways to do this kind of work, and we would encourage you all to think about what would work best in your community and with the members of your team. But generally speaking, the goal here would be to gain consensus on what themes and issues are rising to the forefront when it comes to coordinated eligibility and enrollment, and what the team is thinking about in terms of early priorities for the plan. So here, the toolkit would have resources to help the team do this, to help the team analyze its findings of what's in place in the community and what might be needed. And this can all sort of help to focus that community-based plan. So I'm going to take a minute to pause there and give folks another chance to share any strategies, tips, or tools around sort of understanding that local context around CEE that you have in your community, or might be good to include in the toolkit. Give it just 30 more seconds or so, give people time to formulate thoughts. Yeah, I do see a suggestion. Survey fatigue is real. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Clearinghouse for community surveys, cross-reference, and complete indicator searches, what we are looking for. We're asking our communities to take surveys so frequently. That's a really excellent point. And definitely something to think about in terms of a tool. I think the other thing that we hope to make clear in the toolkit is using multiple strategies to gather information is a good way to approach this work. And so for your community, if there's been a lot of local surveys recently, if you just are feeling that fatigue, maybe that's not the approach you take here. Maybe it's setting up a different approach around a community conversation or some focus groups, one-on-one conversations, whatever, thinking about what was going to work in your community, because we definitely do hear that this takes time and effort to sort of provide this feedback. So again, just being really thoughtful about the tools that you're using a variety of approaches. So that's a really good flag. Thank you for sharing that. And it looks like we have another question around data systems. Yes, and we have some information about that in the landscape, and we can also provide some more information about that in the toolkit around data systems that organizations are using in the work. There's definitely a few mentions of that, and then someone sharing, some folks are using Head Start Data Plus. So great, thank you for sharing that. These are all great things that we can incorporate into the toolkit moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing your questions and feedback, everyone. That's really helpful. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next part of the toolkit, which is all around putting all of this together. So at this point, you have your team, you're working together, members are gathering information and data, and you do have a sense of the direction your CEE system should go in. So now it's time to craft the community-based plan, starting with a vision for the work, working through potential strategies and action steps, and then drafting and finalizing your plan. So the first stage here is setting a vision. Developing successful CEE systems can be complex. There are definitely a lot of parts of comprehensive systems that should be considered, and various approaches that can be taken to achieve the goals of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. I'm going to wait just a minute to see if we can get to the next slide on vision. Yes, great, thank you. So starting with a larger vision for the system helps communicate your goals to your wider community. It can create clarity and really can provide guidance and touchstones for planning and decision-making as you move forward. To create a strong vision for community CEE efforts, the team should really identify, like, what is the ideal state for CEE in the community? What would this system, if it was perfect, look like or do for families and the community? A vision statement should be both challenging and inspirational and create a mental image for the team and the community to aspire to. So for this step, to support communities in developing that vision, the toolkit will have things like templates to support brainstorming and crafting a vision statement, tips and guidelines for writing vision statements, some examples and things to think about. So that will be all provided in that part of the toolkit. So the next part of this is considering the opportunities around CEE. So now there's a vision guiding the community CEE system. So it's time to begin exploring the specific coordinated eligibility and enrollments that can bring the community closer to achieving that vision. The community team should now have a thorough understanding of the current landscape, the strengths, needs, and preferences of families, and the specific elements of a comprehensive CEE system that will be the focus of the plan. So now that you have all that, you would begin to identify the strategies that will be a part of the plan and how the strategies you have selected will bring in and advance the key principles of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. So for example, if you are planning to work on community-driven outreach efforts to build awareness, you should consider how the principles of family-centered, relationship-based, equitable, and coordinated and aligned will be integrated into your strategy. So to walk someone through this, for example, thinking about family-centered, you could be asking the community and your team, how can community communication and outreach efforts reach families in the places and the spaces where they spend their time, whether that's the pediatrician, at their faith-based organization, at the grocery store, things like that. A relationship-based, how can the community leverage local relationships and trusted community members to develop whatever communication and outreach strategies are going to be used? Looking at equity, how is the community providing culturally relevant communications and outreach to different families in the community? And coordinated and aligned, how can the community leverage state resources such as GSCs, GSPCs, and trusted advisors to engage with the local community to develop these community-driven communication and outreach strategies? So with the principles in mind, communities can identify the specific activities to include in their plan that will integrate these principles and help the community achieve its vision. So here, to support communities in this part of the work, the toolkit will include worksheets to help evaluate coordinated eligibility and enrollment strategies, principles, as well as examples of specific CEE activities that could be undertaken in the community. And now we're on to finalizing your plan. So all this work has been, building towards the development of the plan. Now it's sort of time to put your pen to paper and work on your plan. Creating a plan to guide CEE efforts in the community provides a way to prioritize strategies and approaches and identify concrete action steps for implementation of your CEE goals. These systems are multifaceted, so often communities may want to begin with one element in their plan and then building their system out from there step by step. Crafting an actionable plan that is time-bound, that builds from strengths and addresses gaps and aligns with your community's vision is really important to developing a successful system. So some key elements to think about and include in the plan would be the vision for coordinated eligibility and enrollment, your goals for CEE, strategies, action steps or activities to support those strategies, timelines, resources, who's leading the work and any potential partners that should be engaged, as well as metrics of success. So the toolkit will include a specific coordinated eligibility and enrollment planning template, but we also recognize that some communities may have different action planning templates that they have used in the past or that they would like to use. And so we will definitely, want to support communities if they choose a different process. But we do want to emphasize that it's really important to share the plan with families, providers, and other community members before you finalize it. This not only generates greater community buy-in, but it can also spark additional ideas and thinking that hadn't come to the forefront before, greater reflection and sort of thoughts around or consideration of any unintended consequences. So you can share the plan in any number of ways, posting it online or on social media, presenting the plan at, existing current gatherings or meetings. Those are just a few ideas, and there'll be more along those lines in the toolkit. Then once you have your plan that's final, you definitely want to make it available and think about how you're going to continue to engage the community in providing ongoing feedback, as implementation gets underway. And there'll be more on that in a minute. And so here the toolkit will include, as I mentioned, sort of an action planning template and some guidelines and strategies for sharing the plan with the community. So that is the third of the 4 sections. I'm going to pause again for just a moment to see if any folks would like to share any strategies or ideas for things to include in the toolkit in the chat around drafting that community-based plan. Okay, I do see a few questions. It looks like Samantha's been answering a few of them. I can answer, is there anything in the landscape related to utilizing systems such as 211 or MyBridges for part of this work? Yes, there is information about that in the landscape. So definitely take a look at the landscape, and that's also included in the toolkit as well. Oh yes, Samantha answered that, sorry. Okay, and then Sherry has some comments. Would this be more like creating a strategic plan for the work rather than a how-to manual? Yes, and Samantha's also answering that in the chat. The aim of the toolkit is to help folks come up with a locally designed plan to really start this work in a way that is thoughtful, and it can be sort of used as a process to do this, to incorporate each of the different elements. We'll give it just a few more seconds, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mimi to talk about the final section.
We've finally come full circle. We are now have gotten started, gotten a team together, developed a plan, and now it's time to plan for the future by implementing your plan, evaluating efforts, and consider sustainability. So as you roll out your CEE plan, it will be important to consider not only how the plan is being implemented in the community, but how its success will be determined and how the work can be supported and sustained over time to create lasting change for families and children. So we're going to talk about 3 steps here. The first is implement the plan. Implementation simply means putting your plan into action by executing, tracking, and managing people and activities. Because your plan likely includes multiple partners working across sectors, it will be important to create some structures to support collaboration and document agreements. And then once your plan has really been launched and activities get underway, it will be important to have some ongoing ways to assess progress and gather feedback on how the plan is working. If your plan involves several partners working together across sectors to carry out your action steps and strategies, then an important step, even before you roll the plan out, is to consider and to execute formal partnerships and agreements that define implementation roles and responsibilities. Next, once the plan is underway, having some way to track progress and gather ongoing and regular feedback from beneficiaries, including families, providers, and other community stakeholders, will strengthen implementation overall and can help sustain community engagement in support of the plan. Finally, closely aligned to gathering regular feedback is pausing from time to time to take a deeper look at how well the plan is working by looking more specifically at strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and barriers or threats that may have arisen once the plan is underway and is being executed on the ground. So some things that we include in the toolkit at this point to help you with that initial process of getting started and kind of tracking and getting regular feedback include some tips and examples of creating formal agreements or MOUs, a list of various approaches to and methods for gathering ongoing community feedback, including focus groups, community walks, listening sessions, and surveys, unless people are way too tired again, as we heard, of taking surveys. Then finally, the last tool is a protocol for a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats process that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is a really nice way, I think, to gather your original team back together or gather groups of community stakeholders together to kind of take a deeper dive look, as I said, at what's really going well and what are some of the opportunities maybe to make some mid-course corrections as you're moving ahead. So the next step then is to evaluate your program. Evaluating progress and impact of your CEE plan is important, obviously, because it helps you determine not only if the overall success in achieving the goal in the present is taking place, but also it helps you for planning for the future. Evaluation can help make the case for continued efforts and can create and maintain political will and financial support that's needed to keep your efforts moving forward. So there are really two types of evaluation that many communities use when they reach this point in their process of implementation, those being a process evaluation and an outcome evaluation. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with both, but just quickly to give you a kind of high level understanding of why each type of evaluation will be important in planning for the future and managing sort of tracking your progress in the present. So outcome evaluation measures the effectiveness of the program in producing change. In other words, it tells you what happened to the beneficiaries and how much difference did it make to them. Process evaluation, on the other hand, measures the extent to which the work or the initiative is operating as intended, and it examines things like the services being delivered, the beneficiaries of the services, what resources have been used to deliver the services, and maybe some examples or some stories on practical problems that have occurred and how they have been resolved. So in a nutshell, your outcome evaluation will tell you how effective your program has been in achieving change. Your process evaluation will help you see how your change has been achieved. These are both really important kinds of information to have, important data to have at your fingertips, especially as you continue to move into the next step of the process that we're going to talk about, which is planning for sustainability and making sure that your program or your initiative can be sustained over time. So the last step is to consider sustainability. So what's it going to take to build the systems and the resources that you need to make sure that your plan can be continue to function as you planned it. Sustainability is really the active process of establishing your CEE project. It's not just about continuing it, it's doing the work to develop relationships, practices and procedures that become a permanent part of the community, or as I've heard some people talk about it, just getting the process into the water of the community. So that's what sustainability is all about. Unfortunately, it is a challenge for all programs and initiatives that serve children and families. We all know about too many programs that have shown progress at the startup phase, but then eventually fade away because they were unable to tap into or make the best use of fiscal and community resources they need to continue the work. So taking time to consider what it will take to keep your CEE program going ensures important family supports and services will not decrease or be eliminated. Developing a sustainability plan is really the best way to go about making sure that you can sustain your program. So again, it's bringing back your team or assembling another team that can help you think through what is it going to take to make sure this program can be sustained over time, and what are the different strategies that we need to be deploying now that will make sure that we can do that, and putting those together into a plan. So some of the important elements of sustainability planning that you need to consider, I would think, as you take this next step would be first identifying funding and financing supports, solidifying community support and buy-in, building capacity to implement the CEE work, both in terms of having the providers and the program supports that you need, but also having, again, that leadership structure and some sort of infrastructure to make sure that the work will continue because someone's kind of holding the whole for you. And then finally, documenting success and telling your story is so important. And it's a part of evaluation, but it's also collecting the important stories that you hear from families and providers about how the process is working, and using those to, again, build some support and some momentum around making sure that the program can continue. So some tips and tools that have been included in this section to inform sustainability include a list of suggested strategies for sustaining programs. This is not specifically focused on CEE, but just some of the general best practices on what it takes to sustain any effort. And then we've provided a checklist for sustainability planning for community eligibility and enrollment systems and programs. So I'm going to stop there again to see if there are any suggestions that you might have for tools or resources that we can include that focus on this last piece of implementation, evaluation, and sustainability.
Okay, so as a toolkit really ends at the development. That last section, no, it ends, and Mimi and I'm sorry, and I jumped in because I was doing the next section. This is Samantha, everyone. Sorry about that. I think Mimi and Angela, you can speak a little bit more on that, but the last section that Mimi went over is really about kind of that, yes, that sustainability part, implementing and carrying forward. So there is a section on kind of what's next, and how to go past the plan and move forward to kind of, as Mimi said, putting everything in the water, as she said. But Mimi or Angela, please pop in if I have misspoken.
No, that's exactly right. The last section of the toolkit is really focused on the important, you've got your plan and now let's put it into action and do some implementation. And so there are some resources in there for doing that, as well as Samantha mentioned, conducting evaluations and planning for sustainability. So it will be all three of those: implementation, evaluation, and planning for sustainability will be in the toolkit.
So I'm going to share the last section here on kind of what's up next. I added the link to the landscape in the executive summary again. So as Angela mentioned in the beginning, the landscape is complete. The executive summary is not on the OGS website. So grab it from here if you'd like the executive summary. The toolkit, obviously, we're having in progress now. And if you've all been sharing things with us in the chat, really appreciate that. We're going to give you an email where you can send us more information as we kind of continue over the next couple of weeks to finalize the toolkit and get the last of the tools and examples in there. And then I think what everybody has been hinting at, and you've seen it in the chat if you're not familiar, we have this community of practice coming up. So there are 8 communities. We'll be piloting practices and strategies that are aligned to the landscape and the toolkit, based on the framework. So that will be an opportunity. And then we will have a final report, which will document kind of the lessons learned from the communities of practice. And I'm sorry, I should say, we are looking for, I want to make sure, because I addressed it to Sherry specifically in the chat, but I want to make sure everyone saw that. No matter what stage of development you are in around the community of practice, the state is looking to develop a cohort of mixed levels of implementation. So please make sure that you apply if you are interested. But the final report will share lessons from the community of practice and recommendations for the state moving forward. So we do have one more webinar in this series coming up, and that will go over the application. And I'm going to grab it from the chat. We have two versions of the application for you. One is an online version, which is through SurveyMonkey. You can apply that way. There's also a PDF version of the application. Feel free to submit via email if you want to download that, and it's a fillable PDF, so you can submit it that way. So yay, the application has been released. It's kind of what we all have been waiting for. We will have the informational webinar next week. We will be providing also for 2 weeks in November, open office hours where you can sign up in 15-minute chunks if you have questions. You want to make sure that kind of what you're presenting fits and aligns, things like that. Applications are due November 26th. And then selected communities will be notified in very early January. We have just a couple minutes, and I know that that was quick on what's next, but really we wanted to make sure that we shared the application, the PDF version as well, made sure you all had the landscape in the executive summary to help you apply. We encourage everyone to apply. As I said, there will be a whole webinar next week on all of the questions that you may have regarding the application for the COP, but just wanted to, again, allow a couple minutes before we close out if there are any further questions about anything that we've talked about today.